Hello, and welcome to Legendary Tractors. When the news broke in November of 1984 that Tenneco had purchased International Harvester's farm equipment division, dealers were blindsided. One said, "I felt like I lost my family." Another turned to his son and said, "The sleeping giant is dead." Nowadays, 40 years later, when you go into social media, you might find case guys who still don't think too highly of IH. And then there's IH guys who can't stand case. And then there is the people who love their boxcar magnums. Let's take a look at the 1985 CaseIH Farm Equipment Buyer's Guide and see if we can put together some thoughts on how this all went down. "1985 was a turning point. For the first time, farmers opened a Case International Harvester Buyer's Guide. The very first pages boldly declare, 'Come look at us now,' and introduce Case IH as a fresh team for today's farmer. At first, the text talks about two proud traditions coming together. But then, something interesting happens. The International Harvester is never mentioned again. From that point on, the focus is entirely on Case. For IH loyalists, it must have been a shock. The company they had trusted for generations had vanished from its own catalog. That disappearance, that silence, speaks volumes. It shows how Case and its parent company Tenneco wanted to present themselves, not as a merger of equals, but as a Case-led company that had absorbed International Harvester's assets. For IH loyalists, opening this guide must have felt like proof that their brand was disappearing. The tractor section opens with a promise of tradition, innovation, and commitment to the future. Case IH claimed to offer 23 models ranging from 18 to 400 horsepower, with 2- and 4-wheel drive, plus front-wheel assist. On paper, it looked like a complete lineup. But in reality, things had changed. When the Rock Island, Illinois factory shut down, IH's big tractors disappeared overnight. The high horsepower machines in this brochure were all Case designs. The only harvester tractors that survived were the smaller 84 series built in Doncaster, England. So while the words talked about two traditions, the horsepower lineup was almost entirely Case. The model chart even shows overlap. Case's 94 series from 65 to 85 horsepower sitting right on top of IH's 84 series, which ran from 35 to 72. Two sets of tractors, nearly the same horsepower, side by side in the same catalog. Why both were kept is unclear. The photo montage tells the story visually. A small IH 484 alongside a massive Case 4-wheel drive like the 4494 and the 2594 2-wheel drive, all painted in the new red. The bulk of the tractor section is devoted to Case designs. The 2294, 2394, 2594, and 3294, plus the big 4494 through 4994 4-wheel drives. The marketing is heavy on comfort and technology. The Silent Guardian cab, electronic instrumentation, 4-wheel selective steering, and front-wheel assist, which was fast becoming a must-have feature. It's clear Case IH wanted to present itself as modern, comfortable, and sophisticated. A big step from the rugged, straightforward machines IH had been building. Next came the smaller case tractors, models like the 1896, 2096, and the 1394 through 1594. Again, all Case heritage designs, now flying the CaseIH banner. Finally, at the very end, we reached the IH survivors, the 385 through 884 tractors, plus the compact 274, 284, 234, and 254. The 84 series, built in Doncaster, England, were the only real reminder of IH's tractor heritage in this first CaseIH catalog, as the 200 series were rebadged Mitsubishi tractors from Japan. Case dominated the horsepower lineup, while IH was reduced to the small end. For farmers paging through in 1985, the message was clear. This was not a merger of equals. The next section turns to tillage equipment, and here is the twist. It was all International Harvester. Case had discontinued its own tillage tools back in the 1970s, so the lineup came entirely from IH. In fact, Case did not have much in the way of equipment at this time, just tractors. The rest were rebadged equipment from other brands such as Oliver and White. On the following pages, the catalog rolls through the implements. Mounted plows like the 420 and 450, semi-mounted plows like the 720 and 730, and trailing plows in the 700 series. Two-way plows follow, and then disc harrows, seedbed tillage tools, and soil conditioners. Surprisingly, the tractors pulling the equipment in the photos were IH, machines no longer being sold. From this point forward, every piece of equipment in the brochure is shown with IH tractors in the field. That makes this catalog likely the last official CaseIH marketing material to feature IH tractors in action. Compare that to the tractor section earlier in the brochure. The irony is hard to miss. Case tractors, the ones CaseIH was trying to sell, were shown only in studio portraits. No dirt, no implements, no action. Meanwhile, IH tractors, even though they were no longer for sale, were trusted to demonstrate the equipment in real farm settings. It's a strange way to market a brand new lineup. The tillage equipment section begins with a paragraph declaring, "There's no more certain way of getting maximum yields than by beginning with proper tillage practices." 40 years later, that line reads almost ironically. Conservation tillage and no-till farming have since replaced much of the equipment shown in the brochure. In some ways, it feels like history has come full circle. CaseIH today doesn't have a very broad lineup of its own. While it still does have tillage tools, many other pieces of equipment now come from New Holland under the CNH umbrella. Maybe the lessons of the CaseIH merger influenced why CNH never fully merged the New Holland and CaseIH product lines. The next section of the CaseIH Buyer's Guide moves into crop production equipment. Planters, drills, cultivators, and rotary hoes. The introduction makes the point that in most regions, farmers only get 10 to 15 days of truly optimum planting conditions each year. The message was clear. If you wanted to make the most of those days, you needed CaseIH's equipment. The big highlight was the International Harvester Early Riser Planters. IH had recently developed this line, and CaseIH leaned on it heavily. The guide featured two versions, the 800 Cyclo Air Planter and the 800 Plate Type Planter. These were offered for corn, soybeans, cotton, peanuts, and peas. The brochure went into detail about tractor attachments, transport configurations, and even seed monitoring systems. Looking back, the plate planter was already behind the times. It wouldn't be around much longer. The air planter was solid for its day, but has since been replaced by vacuum systems very similar to what White was developing about that same time. Then things get a little strange. The Model 386 plate planter shows up, using a shoe opener instead of discs, a technology that was cutting edge in about the 19th century, but pretty outdated by 1985. There's also mention of a Model 82 middle buster planter, but no photo. And then there's a picture of the Model 87 Blackland planter, but no description. It almost feels like this section slipped past the editors without a final check. From there, we move into grain drills. The lineup included the 5100 end-wheel drill, a soybean special, the 6200 press drill, and several 7100 and 7200 versions. These mechanical drills have been around for a century, and in many ways, they were better at precise seed placement than the air drills that would follow. The big advantage of the air seeders was their size, covering many more acres in a day. By the late 1990s, CaseIH had moved away from mechanical drills and focused on air seeders. Yet, there's still a demand for the older style, and today companies like Great Plains continue to build them. Even in 1985, you can see the push towards scale. The brochure highlights tandem hitches and multiple drill hookups to cover larger acreages. The crop production section closes with cultivators and rotary hoes. The text promises, reduce your production expenses of row crops by controlling weeds mechanically with Case International cultivators and rotary hoes. At the time, this was still common advice, but over the next few decades, mechanical weed control was almost completely replaced by herbicides. With today's concerns about herbicide resistance and environmental impact, cultivators are making something of a comeback, but probably not from CaseIH. The models shown here were the 183 rear-mounted cultivator, the 144T front-mounted cultivator, the 170 Lister cultivator, and the 181 rotary hoe. Seeing the 144T is a bit of a surprise. Front-mounted cultivators had mostly disappeared when narrow front tractors went out of fashion in the 1970s. So in the planting and cultivation section, the story is similar to tillage. The equipment was all IH heritage, some of it cutting edge, some of it already outdated. And once again, it was IH tractors in the field pulling the tools, not the Case tractors that CaseIH was trying now to sell. The next section of the CaseIH Buyer's Guide introduces hay and forage equipment. The message was simple. Good hay is the key to profitability in livestock and dairy operations, whether you farmed a few acres or thousands. And CaseIH claimed they had the equipment to help. First up were the mower conditioners. The brochure showed models 1490 and 1590 center pivot machines. Before seeing this guide, I didn't even realize IH had built a center pivot unit. The truth is, I don't think that these units sold very well. By the mid-1980s, Heston, New Holland, and John Deere had that market pretty well locked down. The 1190 mower conditioner did move in decent numbers, but it was still maybe a step or two behind its competitors. Then, almost surprisingly, the brochure spends time on the 1100 and 1300 sickle bar mowers. By 1985, these were antiques, made obsolete almost 20 years earlier by New Holland's introduction of the Haybine mower conditioner. Finally, they highlight hay rakes. The models 96, 97, and 86. They were basically clones of New Holland's rollabar rakes, which had been the industry standard since the 1950s. Even then, New Holland dominated the bar rake market and still does today, although their popularity is not nearly what it once was, as the V-wheel rake has become very popular due to its higher production capacity. The guide also features self-propelled windrowers, the gasoline-powered 4000 and a diesel 5000. By the mid-1980s, almost all farm equipment had moved to diesel, so it's surprising to see a gas-powered unit still being promoted. Header options were listed for hay, grain, cane, peas, and even mint, something I didn't realize was a crop with specialized harvesting needs. Next came balers. IH have been long respected for their small square balers, and the guide highlights models 428, 435, and 445. But when it came to round balers, CaseIH was behind the curve. Their 3450 and 3650 were fixed chamber designs, which couldn't produce bales as tight as the variable chamber machines offered by Heston, John Deere, and Vermeer. By this point, most farmers were moving from squares to rounds, and CaseIH didn't have a competitive offering. The forage equipment section included the 781 and 881 harvesters, the number 10 flail chopper, and forage blowers for filling upright silos. By the mid-1980s, bunk silos were replacing uprights, but ironically, uprights are making a small comeback today thanks to some automation. One final note, the brochure shows IH forage boxes built by Caston. Caston went out of business in 1985, the very same year that this catalog came out. It makes you wonder if the CaseIH merger sealed their fate as well. If there was one place where International Harvester's legacy really carried CaseIH forward, it was in combines. By 1985, the Axial-flow rotary combine had already proven itself in the field, and it was the crown jewel of IH technology. The buyer's guide put the spotlight on the Axial-flow line, showcasing its efficiency, its ability to handle tough conditions, and its promise of less grain loss. Farmers in the 1980s were struggling with thin margins, and CaseIH made a point of showing how the rotary design of the 1460 and 1480 could save fuel and maximize harvest. Unlike tractors where the Case lineup dominated, the combine section was pure harvester DNA. This was IH's innovation, and it has remained the backbone of CaseIH harvesting ever since. The brochure also featured a range of headers, grain platforms, corn heads, and specialty attachments. These gave CaseIH flexibility to cover everything from small grains to row crops and even some specialty crops. The variety underscored that CaseIH wanted to be seen as a complete harvesting solution. Specialty combines like the 1482 pull type, the 1470 side hill, and the 750 pull behind windrowers gave farmers even more harvesting options. Cotton pickers may not have been as universal as combines, but in cotton country they are essential. Including them in the 1985 guide signaled that CaseIH intended to support farmers across every major crop market, not just corn, soybeans, and wheat, but cotton as well. In the harvesting section, CaseIH leaned heavily on International Harvester's innovations. The Axial-flow combine and the cotton picker carried Harvester's reputation into the CaseIH era. They were proof that not everything was lost in the merger. some of the most important technologies survived and still define the CaseIH brand today. The materials handling section focused on loaders and manure spreaders. The loader lineup is a strange one. Most of the models were designed for IH tractors that had already been discontinued. Maybe CaseIH thought farmers would want to grab a loader while they still could, but it feels like a leftover from an IH catalog. The manure spreaders were more straightforward, 6 models ranging from 148 to 343 cubic feet, with both single axle and tandem axle designs. Not glamorous, but essential tools for livestock operations. Near the end, the brochure groups together a variety of smaller equipment: grinder mixers, shredders, snowblowers, and blades. The 1250 and 1350 grinder mixers were aimed at livestock farms grinding their own feed. The 50 and 60 shredders handled crop residue. Snowblowers, models 70 and 80, reminded farmers that CaseIH equipment worked year-round. And finally, a full range of rear blades from the small Model 11 to the heavy-duty Model 50 for grading, snow, or light earth moving. It was a true catch-all section, rounding out the catalog with the practical, everyday tools that farmers needed. The buyer's guide closes with reassurance. CaseIH promised that it didn't matter whether you owned a Case, an IH, or one of the new CaseIH machines. They were there to support you. Genuine CaseIH parts and dealer service were emphasized to keep farmers confident during a time of uncertainty. They also highlighted their massive dealer network. By combining Case and IH outlets, CaseIH could claim to be one of the largest support systems in agriculture. The message was simple: wherever you farmed, there would be a CaseIH dealer ready to help. The 1985 CaseIH Buyer's Guide wasn't just a catalog. It was a snapshot of a company in transition. Case tractors and studio portraits, IH tractors still in the field, entire equipment lines carried over, and others already outdated. For some farmers, it was proof that International Harvester was gone. For others, it was reassurance that CaseIH had the size and support to carry them forward. 40 years later, this catalog tells a story of not just equipment, but of the merger that reshaped American agriculture. So, what do y'all think? Was this merger ultimately a good thing? Did it turn out the way that the folks at Case thought it would? One of the things that I find anecdotally interesting is that there seems like there is a lot more interest in the pre-merger IH tractors than the Case tractors of that time. So I'll ask again, what do you all think? Leave me a comment. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me to bring more legendary tractor content to you. I hope that you all have a great day.